Well, hello everyone. Here you show you right here. I'm talking about responsibilities right here, and I know I mentioned before about talking about understanding about between winning and losing, and I talk about for technical difficulties and all that. But a lot of times that in case if anybody were to ask me that why don't you go ahead and talk about responsibility, and really any parent might even ask to go ahead and have a little discussion about that, even if it is related to maybe smaller task. And it sure seems that way, that even if it is a smaller task, even if it is small fixes, and small fixes. So a lot of times it sure seems that way, that what exactly does that mean whenever somebody says smaller fixes? And I can go ahead and put that on here, like if you want to put like a list of chores, and a lot of times it sure seems that way, that if you want to kind of know them as chores, they're chores, to where that you go ahead and form any sorts of task and all that on a note, and you want to know too that small fixes in a small task, a smaller task. So it sure seems that way, that each time we think about that, though, and want to know too is that that responsibilities, and you say about you talk about maybe in maybe three sentences, but talk about about responsibilities, and another way, if you want to cause, is toward it that work that is encouraged to be assigned to you based on your work preferences. So really, what does that even mean? When we talk about work preferences, I guess that very much means is that if you're going to be talking on a resume or a cover letter, and so far as courage right here, I'm trying to say courage right here, but it sure seems that way, that each time we think about that, though, that 102, that what's the best way of how you want to describe a responsibility? I might go preferences, but then also something which somebody someone else agrees to fill in that agenda. So if you want to kind of call it, like it's an agenda towards work, a work assigned to you to you to be taken care of. To be taken, like to be, or I can also maybe put on there work assigned to you to be to be done. And so a lot of times it sure seems that way, that each time we speak about responsibility, that we're also maybe going to be talking about that stuff that comes up all of a sudden. It could also maybe be about that the top agendas, and I guess you say that the top most important task. The top most important. So it sure seems that way, that if you're going to be speaking about the chores and anything else that needs to be done around the house, and you're always wondering toward it, for how you even start. Well, you go ahead and start out with the most important task before you go ahead and go to the ones that are really are optional. That's not really optional, but somebody asked to go ahead and take care of some of those responsibilities, and so that's why it sure seems that way, that every time we speak about responsibility, that are you basically talk about occupation? Are we talking about maybe like the type of a chores that by duties, and then others? So I'm like, but on the other hand, how often are they going to be known as goals? So let's just say that if it's supposed to be a goal of achievement. So the only time, maybe like everybody else, and I mean, I don't blame anyone that if you were to be talking about goals and achievements, that's something, talk about pride, right? That's something that you are working towards, and then compared to what is required. So it sure seems that way that if you're trying to think of 10 things that you're trying to get worked out whenever it comes to responsibilities, and it sure seems that way that you go ahead and add in right here, talk about for something, someone with the courage to know is to fulfill. And but let's just say that it's another way of how you want to cause this, to where work that is on higher demand than originally scheduled. So what does that usually mean? Well, that pretty much means is that your orders, and I guess if you want to kind of call it, it's like it's an order to where it's a objective to where that whenever you do whenever there's orders that do come in, that those are basically are saying is toward this work is needed, or ticket orders, and as well as other numbers categories that go by. So it sure seems that way that each time that we do think about responsibilities, it sure seems that way that the first thing that we might think is to where it's a game changer or a mind teaser or something like that. But I really think too that each time we think about responsibilities, the word that I'm actually searching for is actually that I know I talked about before. Is talking about that the solution that works. Yeah, the solution that works. So it sure seems that way that every time we think about this, and if it's going to be maybe tools, or maybe if it's going to be anything, the solutions for the things that work, right? And so that's why it sure seems that way that every time we think about a lot of the work that we done our research on, that you're always wanting to know too, that really that this right here, of course, is not something that was in the manual. So like everybody else might even say that this originally was not in the manual. So it sure seems that way that people may be want to know too, if it was not in the original. It was not in the original instructions, also known as the manual. So every time we think about that, the manual. So every time we think about that, though, are we really thinking about any rules of any kind or anything like that? But on your hand too, it sure seems that way that whenever we do think about instructions, and whenever we do think about maybe small fixing, a lot of times, you're always wanting to know too that really that why is it whenever you do think about a lot of those problems that could come up, and a lot of those fixings and everything that comes up with great power and great responsibility, right? And so it sure seems that way that every time you think about that, since you were a kid, you're probably always want to know too that why is it that maybe responsibility, that there's a lot of things that you missed about the better understanding about responsibility. I'm like, well, responsibility pretty much means that you take charge of the task and agendas and everything that need to be done, right? But at the same time, it sure seems that way that do you think that maybe that there's a little bit more than what could be provided during a time? So I know, like everybody else might say, if they've been in that situation to where you go ahead and write a paper about some of the stuff right here, and at 102 that that talking about right here, based on your research, though, based on your research, but based on your research right here, that is there enough enough data? Is there enough? Is there enough? Is there enough data recorded just to prove that this task works? And so it sure seems that way, that every time we think about this, though, in a 102, about, whenever parents, say that, yeah, well, another way of how you want to describe our responsibility is another way of how do you want to cause us to where that, yeah, well, really, it's all about promises, right? And, the first thing that you're going to maybe be thinking about is that the promises and possibilities that are waiting to be fulfilled. And it seems like to me that, people can maybe even say that it's all about the promises and possibilities waiting to be fulfilled. And the way I think about too, that every time I think about that, though, I keep thinking that, yeah, well, really, that every time we do think about a new task and a new responsibility, it seems like the first thing that comes to your mind is that, yeah, it was a lot more challenging than what you thought it was, or you thought that it would only take 15 minutes to take care of it. And for the most of the time, that, yeah, if you were to try to put that into a scenario and 102, that, yeah, well, yeah, do you think that you'll be able to take care of it in 15 minutes? Not happening. So a lot of times it sure seems that way, that each time we think about that, though, that you really want to put that into a scenario, or like everybody else might even say that if you were to be writing a resume and talking about some of these objectives, and you're always want to know too that do you think that it would be a miracle, just for a lot of that stuff? I'm like, a lot of stuff that normally it takes between 5 to 10 to 15 minutes, just to be able to take care of it. But let's just say that, maybe if it does take a half an hour to an hour at some point. And but like everybody else might even say that yeah, well, whenever we're talking about time here, that do you think it's okay to think that something is going to take maybe 5 hours, just to be able to do that task? And it's like, almost all the time that you always think about that, to where that the source of language and the way that it's measured by, and you're always thinking too that yeah, when we speak about responsibilities, it sure seems that way, that the first thing that comes to our mind could also be is related to about yeah, promises and possibilities, that you promised that you would watch the movie, or fix something around the house, or maybe if it is doing the dishes, or maybe taking care of something, or maybe reading a story to somebody or something like that. And so I just really think, though, that when we speak about responsibilities, that can mean a number of things, right? But a lot of times it sure seems that way, that since you were a kid, that you were probably always thinking too that does a responsibility look more like a chore, like it's something that you agreed, that you signed up to do. And so a lot of times it sure seems that way, that yeah, whenever you do sign an agreement, a lot of times, and like everybody else might even say, that if you do sign an agreement, that you're basically are agreeing to where that you are willing to take charge of you're willing to take on those challenges of what being able to correspond with a lot of those tasks and responsibilities, right? And to me, though, it's like every time you think about that, though, it's just like being a pet owner. If you're going to have a dog or a cat or anything like that, and 102, that you will be responsible for cleaning and maintaining the maintenance, and then you will be responsible for taking care of feeding the pet, and then taking care of the animals, stuff like that. But I just really think, though, that the first thing that you're going to be, and I'll even tell everybody here, Mike, if you want to go ahead and maybe highlight that even. But Mike, well, really, I don't really, I don't know if I might get, but still, if I can really, but still, but if anything, just put that maybe in bold low. But yeah, are you going to really be thinking too much about how long it's going to take for you to take care of it, rather than to be thinking about, oh, okay, well, it's not even mine, well, that ain't even mine. It's not my property, or it's not, those are not even mine. So it sure seems that the first thing that's going to maybe come to your mind is, if it's not yours, if it's yeah, if it's not yours, if it's not yours, then you're not going to take care of it. And but let's just say, like, so it sure seems that way that we're also talking about, a library card, and we could also be. I'm like, so I can be honest with everybody here too, that back when I was younger, I think back when I was 14, actually, I think, man, I may have been 12 during the time, but I learned, I had to gain a lot of discipline. Just by to where, if you're going to be checking out a book from the library, and a lot of times it seems like that they're always going to be telling you about, what you're responsible for, and what you got to do to take care of this or take care of that. And so it sure seems that way, that ever since, maybe ever since you were 8 years old, that you had chores to do around the house, right? And that also includes keeping your room clean, keeping a bedroom clean, and maybe taking care of taking out the trash, and maybe cleaning the windows or anything like that, or maybe dusting and vacuuming, and maybe doing the dishes or stuff like that. But still, I just really think too that whenever it comes to responsibilities, though, that another thing that I'm also thinking about is toward it, for what you are known best for. So let's just say that if somebody were to talk you into taking care of something just because that, yeah, well, I can't do this, I can't do this by myself, and I'm asking you to be an assistant. So let's just say that if it is, I'm like, yeah, be an assistant, to somebody, and to someone. So it sure seems that way, that, yeah, it's all about teamwork, right? And another way of how you want to call it is, like, talk about for teamwork, right? But it sure seems that way, that each time we think about this right here, talk about for the responsibilities, are another way of stating toward it you are in control and in the accountability and task, right? And so it sure seems that way, that every time we think about responsibility, though, it sure seems that way, that almost all the time you're always going to be thinking about that the things that you really need to stay focused on, and maybe that anything about what you call staying on top of things. And that's why it sure seems that way, that every time I think about it, it's like, work, that is a courage to be assigned to you based on the work preferences, as something at which someone else agrees to fill on what's on the agenda. And so it sure seems that way, that every time we speak about responsibilities, could also maybe me be about is toward it, missed opportunities, cannot be ignored. Cannot be ignored, and knowing about that, yeah, it's all about that testing your mind, and also whenever it comes to understanding about is that yeah, that whenever you do take on a responsibility, though, and a lot of times it sure seems that way, to where that you are pretty much is to where I'm like, yeah, could also be about what's called a bond, to where that it is needed by your attention. So a lot of times it sure seems that way, that every time we think about this though, and you're always want to know too that can responsibilities be explained in a variety of ways, but you're also thinking too that you probably learned the basic responsibility. One of those is maybe by playing a typical board game or some game like that. But let's just say that if we're talking about is toward a back whenever you were about maybe 13, 14 years old, that you were at a party. You were at a slumber party or something like that, and yeah, or just a party. I'll just put on here party. So if you were at a party with a few friends, and let's just say that dress up party or something like that, or any sorts of makeup party. If you're going to be at a party somewhere, and I want to know too that the purpose about that party is that knowing that for who's in charge and who's going to provide the food and the drinks and maybe the costumes and anything like that, and so you're probably thinking too is to where that another way of how you want to describe a responsibility is also known as toward that you'll go ahead, you'll take care of you'll go ahead and take care of this, or you'll go ahead and take care of that. So it sure seems that way that you pretty much are taking control of those tasks, right? So it sure seems that way that that every time we do think about a responsibility that we're always thinking about is that to where that whenever you first learned about that responsibility, whenever you first thought about to assume about what exactly does that mean right there, is that does that basically mean is toward it that you're keeping track, you keep it. You keep it safe. So a lot of times it sure seems that way that how many of us are really going to maybe think as to where that you think of responsibility just like that, to where you keep it safe. If you're going to be maintaining a good storage unit, or maybe if it is maybe keeping your bedroom clean, or maybe keeping your closet cleaned and all that, and so it sure seems that way that that the first thing that you may have been told, even from a teacher though, is that making sure that even if it was a backpack, if it's a backpack or a desk at the school, that keeping things clean, your school supplies and everything organized and clean, and so it sure seems that way that keep it safe or something like that. So a lot of times it seems like the key responsibility that you may have learned back whenever you were a teenager was mainly about keep, take care of it, in order to be able to, take care of your clothes and taking care of your belongings and, stuff like that. And so it sure seems that way that every time we think about responsibility, do we necessarily think about is as toward that those are rules, they are rules, but also can we also look at that is as toward the promises fulfilled and the possibilities. So let's just say that in case if anybody were to ask, is that if you were, I'm like, how do you explain to anybody about that, to where that you were going to I was going to shop for those shoes there, but something came up and I was not able to fulfill that task. And so it sure seems that way that every time we think about that right here is that, knowing about you were gonna do that, you were gonna take care of it earlier, but then something else came up and to that required your attention, right? And so that's why it sure seems that way toward it. The stuff that for what we call big jobs, and compared to the things for what we call is like the priorities that we're going to maybe have to take care of later on in time, and that's why it sure seems that way that when we do think about responsibilities, that it sure seems that way that do we necessarily have to keep in mind over the fact about that when we do think about a key responsibility, right? That yeah, well, really, that you think about, first of all, it sure seems that way that you think about what has been waiting to get done, and another thing that I could also mention is toward if you promised somebody else to go ahead and take care of it from earlier. So a lot of times it sure seems that way that somebody has been waiting patiently for something to be taken care of, and you said you were going to take care of it, and so that's why it sure seems that way that every time we think about that, though, do you really have to explain it, like on any source of job application or a cover letter about to explain about that what you've been able to fulfill whenever it comes to responsibilities, and whenever it does come to agendas, and a lot of times people might even say too that really that maybe not everybody's really going to understand something, especially if it's maybe going to be maybe more than 5 paragraphs long. Not everybody's really going to have time to read all that, but it sure seems that way toward it that details. If you could maybe break down the syllables to where the details can be explained in maybe in only just one complete sentence or something like that, and you're always want to know too, what do you think that it would look like? But it sure seems that way that yeah, you're going to maybe say is to where explained right here that so yeah, if somebody were to ask you a question, a lot of times it sure seems that way, especially on those applications, that if you answer yes or no to a question, and I can be quite honest with everybody here too, that I see that quite a bit, that if you answer yes or no to a question, then they're going to ask you to please explain right here on this line or something like that. Yes or no, if there's going to be a question asked, and so that's why it sure seems that way that yeah, a question is going to be as I start out with the question, a question mark, and then a please explain. Please explain. Please explain, how you arrived at your answer, and please attach a file so that way we can review those recordings. And a lot of times, what I usually see are not really notepad or anything, but a lot of times what I usually see are like maybe an Excel file or a PowerPoint file or something like that you can attach. And those files, of course, are going to contain the information based on what was recorded, right? And a lot of times it sure seems that way that you'll just go over for a review, and a lot of times that you're going to see that too, that it's over, it's getting reviewed, and pending, and a lot of times it's going to maybe say something like yeah, pending, it's pending, and so a lot of times it sure seems that way, that every time we think about that, though, that you're always want to know too, that everything should be there. Everything is there. So the first thing that you think about when we do are working on something important, it sure seems that way. That do you think maybe it's better to go ahead and maybe put this, maybe like into a scenario, but then put it into like a puzzle to where that people are able to see and maybe render. I'm like, yeah, anything that you're working on and anything, like anybody probably say that, yeah, a lot of that stuff that I'm talking about, I think is a lot of it, I think has to do with JavaScript, JavaScript and also rendering files and anything that's defined, for a website or something like that. But on the other hand, it sure seems that way that, yeah, there are a lot of examples that I can show everybody here that unfortunately they're not available right now, but still that using OneNote right here that you see right here that anything that kind of gets you an idea about something and you're always want to know too that the best way of how to improve how the service works, though it sure seems that way, it all goes by research, right? And a lot of times it seems like it's almost all the time that every time you think about what are the possibilities for what you can do whenever it comes to reviewing an application pending, and please explain how you arrived at your answer. And so that's why it sure seems that way that why is it that a lot of stuff right here seems to be so simple, just to answer it, and that's why it sure seems that way that almost all the time, even on those applications. And everybody else might even say that whenever you look at an application, that you're always wondering that you would think that maybe an application should only take you about 15 minutes to fill that out and just to be able to send it and to the manager who needs to review it, right? And that's why it sure seems that way that every time you think about it, and it's like you're always wondering as to where that if it takes maybe the 3 to 5 hours, just to be able to take care of this, and you're always wondering to where that's about how long it takes just to be able to prep a meal, when we speak about meals, that for how long it takes just to be able to cook a meal. And if we're talking about maybe chicken Alfredo or a casserole or something like that, but it takes about maybe 3 hours, just to be able to prep a meal. 3 hours to prep a meal. The prep meal. So I'm like, yeah, in the kitchen. I can just put on here in the kitchen. So every time I think about this right here, and you're always want to know too, that do you really have to multitask, just to take care of something? And a lot of times it's like, multitasking. Now, like everybody else would maybe say that, hey, I'm not really doing it purposely, but what I'm actually working on right here is the fact about that, whenever you were getting, if there was a delay, due to technical difficulties, or maybe if it was in regards to that there was a mess in the kitchen that you had to clean up from earlier. So that's why it sure seems that way, that, that's why everybody seems to be mad all the time whenever there's a whenever there's a delay, or a lot of everybody else might say that, a penalty or something like that, or maybe like a cause for a delay. But, still that I know with me though that whenever we talk about delays, and delays are another way of saying is toward it, taking more minutes, more seconds. How do we? I know there's probably a name for what you want to give it, especially Mike. Whenever the typical science study about, what's that word for a task to where it's all calculated by per second. So let's just say if we're talking about maybe per 30 seconds or something like that there's a name for that. But about how many, I think speedometer or feldometer or something like that. I think maybe a lot of that has to do with the weather. But let's just say that on average though that 30 times seconds or something like that. So if we were to actually do the study about the typical data science, though, that you're always want to know too, that to do the typical studies here, is that that if we're talking about 30 seconds right here, and is that really calculated? And we can maybe do like an experiment right here. Is that yeah, the 3, 4, 4, 7, 8, 4, 5 right here. So let's just say if that right there is supposed to be like a code right there provided into like a math equation right there. So a lot of times it's like yeah, that's supposed to be maybe the speed of the connection, right? That's supposed to be the speed right there. And so a lot of times it seems like that almost all the time that you're always 102. That you don't really pay attention to that too much of the time. A lot of things what you probably do mainly focus on is the connection indicator or something like that. But still, every time we we work on technical matters like this, and you're always 102 that one side says that it's pending, but then whenever you go ahead and look on the other side, and let's just say that maybe that there's a button on there that's waiting for you to push or something like that. Yeah, you submit, the submit button or something like that. And that happens a lot. Like anybody, you probably say too that submit, the submit button, and especially if you're going to be on a Zoom call a lot of times, you may not see those buttons right away. Yeah, you may not. You may not see those options right away, right there. You may not see them right away, but it sure seems that way that a lot of times. That why is it that it seems like that sometimes that they're hidden, maybe in the back or something like that. But still, there's going to be this option here to where that that on your side it's actually showing you that there's a message indicator, and a lot. I'm like, yeah, I think that's usually how it works, as a message indicator, a message alert or something like that. So a lot, I'm like, yeah, they come in hand a lot of times, but you always want to know too that how come that these messages sometimes are hidden in the back, and so a lot of times you're always having to look at your taskbar or maybe your toolbar just to be able to find out where these messages are, and a lot of times it sure seems that way. That they don't always appear at the same spot where you usually look for them, and that's why it sure seems that way. That if you do have maybe more than 5 windows open at a time, then that could also maybe lead to problems, and that can also lead to why people are saying is toward that. Are you really responsible for that? Is keeping track of if that if you have if you got maybe 12 cards being presented to you like at these ticket orders. I'm like, yeah, if all together, if you had 12 cards all together, and I can just use stickers right here for an example, but if you have like if you see all these if you see these different signs and symbols right here, and you're always 102, that message indicator that things that something like that. So a lot of times it sure seems that way that technical supporters would even say too that I think it's really good to go ahead and get some practice with how some of that testing equipment usually works, especially if you're testing the equipment that you're going to go ahead and see that to where that there's going to be message alerts and then the message indicators saying as to where that we are sorry, but we cannot complete this task because we're waiting for you to respond, and we sent you a message to your phone or maybe to your device. And let's just say that if you have like a tablet related device or something like that, a little reader device that you sent a message indicator to, and so that's why it sure seems that way that it's like every time you think about that though, that you're always 102, that one of the reasons why you're working on this right here is so that way you can go ahead and update an application. But let's just say that what it's telling you on that side is that this application is pending. So I guess whenever it means by it's pending is to where it's waiting to be opened, and I guess that's usually what it's that the person who's supposed to be getting that folder right there, the person on the other side is supposed to receive a package or a folder, and so it sure seems that way that almost every time you think about this and you're always wondering to where that that's not my responsibility, that shouldn't be my responsibility is to notify that person all the time about if they're supposed to be getting a message or something, or if they're supposed to be checking their mailboxes. And a lot of times it sure seems that way that you're always thinking as toward that, yeah, well, really, that hey, I told you that it was in the mailbox, or I told you that it was in a Dropbox. And so that's why it sure seems that way that yeah, people might say that oh, okay, yeah, sorry for the wait. So a lot, I'm like, yeah, anybody who's going to be on a Zoom call, even are going to maybe be saying is toward it, something like that. Yeah, so sorry to keep you waiting, and but so it sure seems that way that people might even say that if you look at a lot of these ticket orders a lot of times, and you're always want to know too that that do you think that maybe that it would be maybe convenient to where that you can go ahead and I'm like, do you think that it would be more convenient to where that you can just use one device that operates everything? And you'll always want to know too that you want, I'm like, yeah, for what's convenient, for what's more convenient to you. But I everybody else might say that, yeah, well, my iPhone is pretty convenient and my smart tablet is pretty convenient. But it sure seems that way that almost all the time when we think about this, we're always thinking is to where that, hey, that you're always wondering to where all you really had to do was just was to confirm confirm your configuration, or if anything, go ahead and just click the submit button or something like that, your configuration, and I can go and put that right there. Yeah, the type of wording that I know that the distiller uses, and so it sure seems that way that every time we think about applications, though, it's like especially the ones that are going to be electronically operated, and you're always want to know too that do you think that maybe everything looked better on paper just because you didn't have to worry about all this stuff whenever you had a paper application? Yeah, but in case if you make a mistake, you cannot just white everything. I'm like, yeah, use just typical whiteout, and you cannot erase it. And for sure, in case if you make a mistake on the application, then you can always just you click on the backspace on it. But still, but it sure seems that way that every time we think about applications and all that, and it's like you're always want to know too that every time you think about responsibilities, though, and you're likely to say is toward it, yeah, well, whenever something takes a lot longer than what you thought it did, or maybe if you did something already, and now they're telling you that I'm sorry, but this the uploading time. If you were trying to download something, the timing, it has timed out, and so it sure seems that way. What is the maximum amount of time that most files? And I think that for the most part that a lot of the internet connections nowadays might even say that 11 minutes is the maximum time. To where if a file takes too long to download, just to be able to install this on your system, then it would say stuff like you would get a message indicator, something like that. And so a lot of times, a lot of those messages, and we all probably know too that a lot of those messages, message alerts and everything, and you're always want to know too that you cannot always find them. And so I guess it sure seems that way that every time you think about that though, that are you really going to be mainly be using your phone most of the time, just to be able to use that for your configuration, to where you're just you're waiting to receive a code, or maybe if you are waiting to locate a response tab or something like that, such as something that asks you to submit this file right here, after it's attached. And so a lot of that stuff, which I know I'm describing here, is more like, which I know that it could probably be explained better if I had the email open. But it sure seems that way, that that every time we think about responsibility, it sure seems that way, that we're talking about maybe going through maybe 10 different windows, and always want to know too that if you're trying to describe what you're referring to a lot of times. And but it sure seems that way, that number one, that based on this learning experience though, and like everybody else might even say, that based on the learning experience, that you didn't really learn a whole lot of things whenever you went to the party. Like whenever you went to the orientation, that there was a lot of things that you were not able to follow up with. And that's one of the reasons why it sure seems that way, that whenever you are trained for something, that you're always wondering to where that if you were to set a time, and you might say that, is it really better to set a goal rather than it is to say that okay, well, really, I'm only going to be here for an hour or something like that. But the way we think about that though is that to where that every time you think about that though is to where really, that every time you think about that, between 3 to 5 hours, you might think that it's not going to take that long. It shouldn't take that long. But if we were to actually do the calculations though, and you're always want to know too, that there is such thing as to where that if you do wind up losing track of time, or maybe if you were keeping track of time, or maybe something like to where that if you were caught off guard on some or something like that. But it sure seems that way, that every time we think about this though, that you're always want to know too, well, really, if you're able to, at least if you're able to think about the most important task that need to be taken care of, right? So a lot of times it sure seems that way, that if a job does wind up taking maybe 8 hours total, so let's just say that maybe if it's 8 hours, and not everybody is going to look forward to that. So let's just say that if you were to say total right here, total, it's going to probably take 8 hours total. So if you want to put that into like a scenario, and I want to know too that if you were to respond to that, and people might even say too that oh no, it shouldn't take that long, or you should qualify for this, but so every time we think about an application, it sure seems that way almost all the time, that we're always going to maybe thinking about is toward that maybe the shorter version, like toward that you only want to spend maybe an hour learning the basics about it, right? But still, that maybe not everybody's really going to have time to spend maybe 8 hours total working on something, especially if you're going to be maybe working in customer service. But let's just say that just to be able to coverage. I'm like, just to be able to most important topics. Yeah, paid training especially. So a lot of companies might even say that there are some of them are even offered to give you paid training, paid paid orientation. You're providing tips for our clients. So a lot of times it sure seems that way, that everybody else might even say that that's whenever you just really want to argue about the situation. But it sure seems that way, that every time we think about this, or talk about responsibilities and promises, right? And so it sure seems that way, every time you think about that though, and you're always want to know too, that yeah, do you really agree to where that might, but still, like everybody else might say, that how do we handle that to where if we feel like that something is taking a lot longer than what we originally thought it was going to take, and it sure seems that way, that really, that if you want to kind of put that to a challenge whenever it comes to testing the mind toward how much are you really getting done. So let's just say if you were to multiply that times 5 days, what are the accomplishments that you've been able to fulfill? It's all about the accomplishments, right? Um, the accomplishments, and accomplish the data. So you may think that a lot of that seems to be a lot harder and a lot more than what you can handle. But a lot of times it seems like that if you would actually put that on an application, that a lot of times that the chances of anybody wanting to hire you for a job would maybe be about as toward if you're willing to that put this to a challenge. And a lot of times it sure seems that way, that every time we think about this right here, toward that, yeah, if you think and believe that maybe that's just a little bit too much for what you can handle, but it sure seems that way, that one thing that we can keep in mind too is to where that anything new that from that you didn't know from before, or maybe that anything that you are very familiar with, and maybe if anything that you want to talk, especially during those meetings a lot of times. So it sure seems that way, that if you're maybe going to be like on a conference call or in a teams meeting, and somebody's going to maybe be talking to you about that, anything that you want to share, and I want to tell everybody here about sharing, and because I know that that's something that I've been wanting to talk about too. Talk about for sharing. What does sharing mean? What does sharing mean? Yeah, sharing pretty much means that you are that you're allowing someone else to use look at your stuff. And for number one, I can tell everybody here too, to be quite honest with you, that it seems like that really, why would anybody want to look at that, especially if you don't even know what it is? So anybody who is really curious to know that you're like 102, that if you had all the measurements all right here, and let's just say that somebody was to be looking at, and let's just say that if they were just curious to know what's this or what's that, and hey, that looks interesting, and so a lot of times it seems like that you might have Mike, you may have somebody who's going to ask the questions, but a lot of times it seems like, do you really call that a responsibility, or you just kind of look at that more of a treasure chest? And like everybody else may say that yeah, well, I'm just it's a treasure item to me. And so a lot of times that you always want to know too, that if you're going to be you're talking to somebody, and maybe if you're going to be babysitting, maybe one on during the weekends or something like that, and you're always want to know too that if somebody is going to be asking the questions, looking at something as a treasure item, and 102 is toward that whenever you do share something, you are brighter confidence, and so it seems like the stuff that that maybe somebody else that doesn't know, there's something that you were able to come up with. It could also be about research. It could also be about something that you. I'm like, yeah, like everybody else maybe say that that's whenever you just really want to kind of keep it secret, or not everybody knows about that, and so I'm like, yeah, keep it private, confidential, but. I just really think that, like everybody else, even doctors might even ask, is toward it, if you wouldn't mind sharing this, toward it, if you can go ahead and provide, very kindly to go ahead and provide those resources to us, so that we can better understand what it is that we can better, assist you with. And so that's why it seems like that every time when we do think about maybe a Zoom call or something like that, that whenever you do share something, sharing seems to be much harder just because you don't like people looking at all your stuff. You may not like everybody looking at your stuff. You like you may not like everybody. Everyone is looking at is looking at your stuff. Yeah, using your stuff. It's another way of how you want to call it, borrowing. And, I get that a lot, by the way. I might tell everybody, too, that whenever you're borrowing something, that you're using it, right? But, like everybody else might even say that whenever you do borrow something, that you give it back, but, on the other hand, that it sure seems that way that... what's the best scenario for that whenever it comes to borrowing and sharing your stuff, right? And a lot of times it sure seems that way that if you're trying to maybe show somebody an example of what something looks like, or maybe do a presentation, a lot of times it's a presentation. And I can tell everybody too that that's exactly what it feels like. If you're trying to give a presentation to somebody, you're just trying to show somebody how something works, trying to give a presentation, and that may require you to share something. And, that other person may not want to share it just because, you really need to know what it is first before you share it. But it sure seems that way, that it's like, that's the first thing that comes to your mind is that, why do you even want to share it if you don't even know what it is? But it's like you also want to know too is that really that really I think I do know what it is, or somebody might even say that, well, I may know a little bit more than what you think I do know, or something like that. But a lot of times it seems like that every time we speak about sharing, that you're what you're doing is that you're doing a presentation, right? So it sure seems that way that almost all the time. If you're going to be babysitting, that somebody, or under a review, I'm like, reviews and looking and opening opening that box of goodies or something like that, opening that box of goodies or something like that. It could be candy. Yeah, it could be candy, but I tell you one thing, everybody, that why is sharing seem to be the most difficult part about whenever we're going to be going to maybe a support group or something like that, or maybe if we are going to be in any sort of gathered group or something like that, and you're always want to know too that why you think that sharing is the hardest part compared to anything else. And everybody else might even say that you really want to have your own stuff. You want to have your own personal belongings. You don't want people, you don't like everybody getting their hands on a lot of your personal stuff. And maybe if it's a backpack or, your journal or anything like that. And so that's why it sure seems that way that, really, is that really a part of how to introduce yourself to the group or something? It's just a lot of times it seems like the doctors can even say that too, that whenever we talk about sharing, that you're also providing resources, right? And whenever you do provide resources, that why does that seem to be the hardest part about getting other people to get to know you a little bit better? Why does that seem to be so difficult whenever it comes to learning about what you do, who you are, and what you do? And why do we think that seems to be the hardest part? And everybody else might say is toward well, really, because people are not courteous enough to return those items, or it could also be about as toward it that that they are breakable. That you don't want anything broken. You don't want anything missing or broken that kit. So that's why that yeah, if it's supposed to be like a lunchbox or something like that, but treasure chest, and I can maybe give like maybe 5 different examples, but let's just say maybe if it is a lunchbox or something like that, a lunchbox, it could also be a tool, a kit or something like that. Yeah, a special activity kit. Yeah, toolkit too. Your toolkit would probably, I'm sure a toolkit would work too as an example. But still, why is sharing seem to be the hardest part whenever it comes to introducing the work that you do, the talent that you do? Whenever it comes to getting to know what you do a little bit better, and that's why it seems like to where that when we talk about sharing, that you're allowing somebody else to use your stuff. You're allowing this person to use your stuff. Your property. Yeah, you're allowing somebody else to use your property, and you're one of two that maybe just a little bit of maybe why the top priorities to the responsibilities toward anything that you do bring to a science lab or maybe the school for show and tell or something like that, and you're always one of two that yeah, but whenever it comes to sharing, though, anybody may want to know too that yeah, if you bring any batteries, to school, and I don't think I've ever tried that, but if you were to bring any batteries, I'm like people may say that yeah, how often have you really brought any batteries, rechargeable batteries to school just to show somebody, how it works or something like that. It can maybe be even a glow in the dark pencil or something like that. Yeah, glow in the dark. Yeah, this right here, this glows in the dark, and so I'm like, yeah, I'll go ahead and just put a star right there. If you want to show somebody cool, something cool, and say, yeah, that glows in the dark. And so it sure seems that way that each time we think about, resources, though, it's like, yeah, give a presentation to where that, but let's just say that on average, though, yeah, can I borrow this? Can I use this real quick right here? And so it's a lot. Yeah, a lot of politeness. Yeah, politeness. A lot of times it's like, yeah, politeness. That's usually politeness. Ask nicely. Whenever you ask nicely, then chances are that that person is going to say that, okay, yeah, sure, you can look at it and yeah, politeness. So if somebody asks you very politely, if they can use something, borrow something, look at something, and so it sure seems that way. That why does that seem to be the hardest part whenever it comes to getting along, and whenever it comes to introducing what you do, to the class, and to anybody, to the group, to the training, and I think a lot of it also has to do with the fact about that, yeah, well, really, that, that's based on your work for what you learned. And, it's, so I know a lot of, everybody else might even say that, sharing is the hardest part because that you might even think that, people are not using that property, right? I mean, they're not using it correctly, or that, they're not obeying the proper rules and responsibilities like they should. So that's why it sure seems that way. That wouldn't you think that maybe about the key factor responsibility would apply to those who do decide to share something? And let's just say that sharing could also maybe be something that yeah, that for what's recommended or something similar to what the topic is. And so every time we think about that though, and you're always want to know too that whenever you do share something, you're allowing somebody else to look at it, and you're allowing somebody else to use it, and but still that there's about maybe a 50% chance that, like everybody else would say, that they're really are they're only going to ask to use it, if anything, only if it works or if it's a good example. And yeah, good example number one. Most of the time, it's examples. Example is something based on something very similar to the topic, and everybody else might say that if it's supposed to be a real good example, the good examples, and for sure, no Halloween costume or anything, but everybody else might say that if you think of a good example for sure, that you're going to get that to where that somebody else is going to want to go ahead and ask to use that, ask to present that, and so in a lot of ways you want to know too that whenever you do whenever we talk about responsibilities here, that we're also talking about is that what we maybe think about is to where that do you think that maybe the key factor just to know is to where that it's also about is toward that the resources that you can provide, do you think that maybe that's another way of how do you want to describe energy? And I can be quite honest with everybody here too that I think a lot of it has to do with energy. Motivations and energy. So if we would actually do the studies about that in 102, that whenever we do talk about responsibility, that we're also talking about is toward really that not only do you have work that you could be doing, but then also that if somebody were to find it real convenient, and let's just say if it does work, then chances are then they say that, well, if you don't mind sharing that, and if you are willing to fulfill for what the requirements are. And so that's why it sure seems that way, that every time we think about responsibilities though, all we necessarily thinking about is toward it in case if something goes wrong or something like that, or the fact about try this and see if this works or something like that. But I just really think that something to keep in mind too whenever we talk about responsibilities is that, like 102, number one, you can just kind of keep that in mind to where keep it safe, and is to keep that information handy. And a lot of teachers would say too that that would maybe be the first responsibility that's going to be assigned to you, is keep this information safe, keep it safe. And so it's like, if it's a locker combination, or maybe if it is maybe the passcode to the to the foot locker or something like that, and you're always want to know too that if you have a safe spot where you can keep that, and you're always want to know too, with a safe spot you're talking about, well, really, what is a good safe spot to keep something? And so sure seeing the first thing that you might see though is something like that right there. We're talking safe spots, and but a lot of times it's like you're always want to know too that really that do you think that there should be a rule about that, or if anything that you just say is to where they keep that in mind, to where that whenever we do talk about tasks and responsibilities, that just knowing about is just to where that that we're asking you to do your fair share, and do your part of what needs to be done, and just to kind of keep that in mind. So it sure seems that way, that almost every time you think about that, it seems like to where that not everything is the same. Not everything is the same compared to back whenever you were only 10 years old and you didn't really have a lot of discipline, and so that's why you were always thinking too that whenever you thought about the easier challenges and compared to the most difficult challenges, and you're always thinking too is to where well, it worked before, why does it seem to be a lot harder this time? And so that's why it sure seems that way, that whenever we do think about responsibility though, that you're always thinking about is that to where that yeah, really that when we do think about great power and great responsibility, that there's a difference between the things that you do have control over and the things that you do not have control over. And a lot of times it seems like everybody else might even say that really that it's all measured by the best of your knowledge, right? And so it seems like to me, though, that every time you think about responsibility, it's like, yeah, but the things that are highly expected to happen. And I can go ahead and put that down right here real quick, is that to where things, highly expected to happen. Expected to happen upon request. So every time you think about that, though, it could be related to an application or anything else that you're working on, and that you're always want to know too that yeah, in case if something goes wrong, that what source of backup you think that you have for that. But I just really think too that when we do talk about responsibility, though, that it seems like is toward it. Yeah, it's what I got, and you'll remember that or something like that, or keep that in mind or something. But a lot of times it seems like it's like a lot of teachers would say too that yeah, talk about for keep it safe. And but anyway, thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day.